Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Laura Muter with Switch Pros, and we're super excited because today we are having a big open house at our new facility. We moved here last December, and this was a huge leap of faith for us, but we wanted to bring you in and give you a glimpse of what actually goes on here. So if you're not able to attend, follow along with me and we'll go take a look. I'm gonna head down the hall this direction. And a lot of this, these first couple of doors are actually where the magic happens. So this is where some of the critical R&D and the engineering takes place. So this is home of our president, Robert Muter, and our manufacturing engineer, Nathan Cassins, and they collaborate together on whatever is going to be the next new product. What equipment do we need to make our processes more efficient? What's going to help, what's going to improve our product, and how can we actually add additional capabilities into our switch panel systems so that we're giving you the biggest bang for your buck. Follow me down this way and we'll look at what happens elsewhere. This office here is where we do harness assembly. This first section here, you'll actually see that we already have some wires laid out. They're pre-cut and they actually already have terminals on the end. You can see here that we've already got the terminals on. This process of actually cutting and crimping happens elsewhere, but in this room, this is where our guys actually take the raw wires and they insert them into the connectors, which are genuine automotive connectors. Once the harness is assembled, they band it together and they check for continuity. The other thing that happens in this office here is actually our communications cable assembly. So again, I'll take you out to the wire cutting and stripping machines in a moment, but this is actually what the cable looks like when it comes in. And this is the communications cable that carries the information between the touch panel and the power module. Comes in looking like this. Our technicians actually remove the cap, they strip the shielding off, they actually crimp terminals on, which is done at the desk right here, and then they put the connectors on. And then again, they check for continuity. And we'll move on to the next phase. Over here across the hallway is actually where we do the switch panel assembly and quality assurance. So right over here, at this desk, this is actually where we solder on the pigtails. So every one of these wires is cut and crimped at a different location in the facility, comes here, and actually one of our technicians takes a raw switch panel board, solders all of these wires on, and essentially it becomes what is this small pigtail that carries information from the touch panel to the cable, which then will continue on out to the power module. Once the panel actually has a pigtail soldered on, then it goes over here and it gets a polycarbonate overlay, and then it goes into testing. So typically there's a cart here, and we've cleaned up so that you guys don't have to see our messy daily process, but there's a cart here that includes switch panels and power modules. They go on to this test bench here along with a communications cable. We plug it all in, and our technician actually checks to make sure that every single thing that we're doing here, we're getting a corresponding light to make sure that there's continuity between the touch panel and the power module. And then we also use a phone, and we test the capability of the app to make sure that the app is communicating with the Bluetooth transmitter that's in the touch panel. Now we'll enter this room, which is where we do crimping and we assemble battery harnesses. So this piece of machinery here is actually a wire cutter stripper. The technician will load wire onto the wire rack and feed it through and run a program that tells it exactly how long to cut the wire and where to cap it at the end. It then comes to the technician here who will use the crimper and actually put, they put the appropriate wheel on depending on the size of the wire that we're running, and they will actually crimp using a foot pedal crimper terminals onto every one of these wires, bundle them up, and then they'll deliver them up the hallway to the group that's actually going to assemble harnesses. This workbench over here is actually where we build battery cables. So each battery cable is comprised of a short section, a long section, and an inline fuse in between. This happens to be one that is prepping to be for the SP9100. They actually will use this crimper here to crimp the lugs on to each of the sections. They assemble the fuse holder in the middle, and then they add heat, shrink, and a boot, and then they're ready to go for fulfillment. All right, so let's take a look at some of this machinery that actually makes our lives a little bit easier. These are two of the newest pieces that we've invested in. These pulley machines actually this holds communications cable, large spools of communications cable. The other holds large spools of our welding cable, which is basically either 2-gauge or 4-gauge copper. It actually measures through this machine and drops into a bucket the precise amount of cable that each measurement requires. So in this case, it's measuring 10.5 feet and dropping it actually into a bucket. And from there, it actually is going to be it's almost 11 feet long. It gets tucked into the clips here. Our technician spins this and then actually feeds it right in here. And this bread tie machine will actually coil it and tie it off so that when they take it in and add crimped terminals to it, it's a whole lot easier than dealing with 11 feet of cable. This machine here, actually the last thing we ran were the short sides to the SP9100 battery cables. So the pulleys feed it in, it measures and it drops into a bucket, and from there it goes straight into the room we were just in where they crimp on lugs and prepare the battery cables. This area right over here is actually where we put the epoxy in. So this workstation here, if you'll notice, each one of our switch panels actually has a small window where the Bluetooth transmitter is. We fill that in with epoxy, and that is done at this bench. This is also where we pour all of the epoxy that goes into the power modules, and then we line them up here and they dry for about half a day or so. So that's the process that takes place here. We've got one other big place to visit. So what happens, the process is this. We actually take aluminum bars. They go through the chopping process. We cut them down into smaller pieces, and then they go in and we run a program. On the switch panel, we run top and bottom, so it's a two-step process. Power modules, we run bottom only. They get packaged and then out they go to anodizing. As we move along this hall, first office on the right is marketing and operations. That's actually where we oversee all of the event planning that we're going to do. This is also where we focus on customer fulfillment. It's also HR. It's kind of a catch-all for everything that doesn't get done someplace else in the building. Next door to it is actually packaging and fulfillment. If you want to come inside and take a look around, this is actually where all of the components come off of the testing bench. They come in here on a cart in individual containers, and then they actually get packaged with all of these other pieces that don't actually go to the testing bench. So some of it are things like loom, that, important pieces to the installation that don't need to go through testing. Also installation and hardware kits, all of the cables. And so each box actually receives the appropriate components. They get packaged, they get weighed, they get put into a carton, and out the door they go.